Nintendo has been telling the same lie about the Virtual Boy for 31 years. In 1995, they called this thing portable. It wasn't. And in February of this year, they brought it back and called it portable again, and it still isn't. And they also just straight up lied about it being a Virtual Boy. So today, we're gonna fix that. Real quick for new here, hey, I'm Coulter. On this channel we cover console mods, retro tech, weird PC builds, and generally janky tech projects like this one. So if that sounds like you, be sure to subscribe down below so you don't miss future videos. So the original Virtual Boy, sick piece of hardware. Honestly, like, I have a lot of love for it as a console that I never had because I was a wee lad and these things didn't sell very well. But before the terrible sales, a guy named Gunpei Yokei, the guy who designed the Game Boy, the original Game Boy, wanted to build a head-mounted VR display with color screens and motion tracking back in 1995, which, if you were even alive to remember 1995, that's a wild thing to attempt. Like, props for ambition, my guy. But the budget Nintendo gave him got compromised down to 2 red LED displays, no color, no motion tracking, and instead of strapping it to your face, like, you know, a Meta Quest you'd know today, you set it on a tripod and leaned into it like you were checking the time on a parking meter, which is something you also had to do back then because we didn't have the smartphone app. And these compromises worked, the overall vision was kind of achieved, but it was still quite a compromise. But despite the fact that they compromised on the original head-mount vision for this VR headset, Nintendo still went on record in Nintendo Power Volume 75 in 1995, you know, their own publication, and right on the cover it said this was the first portable console capable of displaying true 3D graphics. Portable is an interesting choice of words because the thing needed 6 AA batteries that lasted 4 hours, it sat on a stand, and required you to bend over a desk to use it. Even Wikipedia 31 years later files this thing under tabletop portable and lists lack of true portability as one of the official reasons it failed. And so I think we can all agree calling this thing portable was a stretch. After filming Coulter here, and apparently Nintendo actually never claimed that the original Virtual Boy was portable. I thought I read that, but it turns out that was on the Virtual Boy fan wiki or something, not the actual Nintendo Power issue. So throughout the video, if I talk about Nintendo lying about it being portable and us fixing that, that premise turned out to have some holes in it. So the main purpose of the video is still true in that I want to take the Virtual Boy fake toy and turn it into a real Virtual Boy. So carry on and back to filming Coulter. And sure, that was 31 years ago, so who cares, right? And then 2026 happened. Enter February 17th of this year, if you're watching this in 2026, and Nintendo released this guy. It's the official Nintendo Virtual Boy Nintendo Classics accessory for the Switch. It's a plastic shell. You put your Switch 1 or 2 into it. It costs basically $100, and to actually play games on it, you also need to be subscribed to not just the Nintendo Switch Online service, but the Nintendo Switch Online expansion pack, which, as you know, costs even more. And for that money, you get to play 7 games on this thing, at least at launch. But yeah, a whopping 7 Virtual Boy games that are like a few kilobytes in size apiece. Upload VR, as well as many other outlets, reviewed this new shell reprise thing and said it's just as eccentric and ungainly as the original was 3 decades ago. Which, fair, they wanted to recreate the aesthetic, it's just they were recreating something that was obviously imperfect. And here's the thing, this thing has been sold out and restocked multiple times since launch because people genuinely love the Virtual Boy, or at least the nostalgic idea of the Virtual Boy. There's real affection for it, and Nintendo could have made something for those fans a little more, you know, polished or, you know, fixing what was broken with the original Virtual Boy, but instead they just made a plastic stand, locked it behind a subscription, and once again called it portable, even though the only portable thing about it is the Switch you're sticking inside it and then sort of cocooning it inside this thing. And that's why today we are going to fix Nintendo's 31-year-old lie. We're gonna take this $99 plastic toy, strip out the guts that require us to buy both a Switch and a subscription, drop in an orange pie and a 5-inch display, and because the whole point of this is to make this thing portable, we're actually gonna take this thing out in the field, you know, away from a desktop, and run it off the EcoFlow Delta 3 Classic for what's going to be the real test of whether the word portable actually means anything with the Virtual Boy. All the parts I bought for this, whether I use them or not, definitely brought the overall cost of this build to be not as cheap as I'd like it to be, but also still probably like half or a third of what an actual Virtual Boy costs in current day money, so we'll get into that in a bit. But before we go any further, quick shout out to EcoFlow for sponsoring this video and for sending over this EcoFlow Delta 3 Classic, which is the battery that's going to make the field test at the end of the video possible, and in a minute you'll be able to see exactly what it can do here. Link is in the description if you want to check it out for yourself, and thanks again to EcoFlow for sponsoring this one. Okay, but back to fixing Nintendo's mistake. So before we build anything, we should look at what Nintendo actually shipped, because this is where where it gets pretty funny. This is it, the whole product. It's just a molded plastic shell with a switch-shaped slot. Wow, it's really hard to say. Switch-shaped slot, a little hinge mechanism, some literal just empty plastic to buffer things, and that's about it. There are no electronics. The lenses are just the little red tinted see-through plastic things. So it's clear I don't think this cost Nintendo too much in R&D to get this thing out, and I'm all for cool nostalgic stuff, but compared to like the GameCube controller they made that's an actual Switch controller that you can use with the Switch and everything, like they could have created a Virtual Boy recreation controller to throw into this package to make it feel a little more complete. But the lack of things going on inside the shell works for us because that means there's a lot of empty and soon to be emptier real estate inside here to drop our own actual hardware into. So without further ado, our parts list for this build is an Orange Pi 02, the 2GB RAM version, and for the OS I landed on Diet Pi, more on that later, a 5-inch HDMI display, which I think is only maybe like a 720p resolution or something like that, but plenty to match the original screen dooring effect of the original Virtual Boy. A tiny little short ribbon HDMI cable, an audio splitter jack, one to make the fake headphone jack on the bottom of this thing actually real, more on that in a bit, and one to go to the new external speaker so that this thing can actually project audio, more on that in a bit. A USB hub so that we can actually plug all this into the Orange Pi, and probably another couple little bits and bobs that I'm forgetting, like cost of hot glue or something, but all in, it was about maybe 100-ish bucks in parts, and then 110 Canadian-ish for the actual shell. And so we're in at around $200 for this build, which, like I said earlier, given that I see Virtual Boys go for about 800 Canadian on my local marketplace, this is about a quarter of the price for something that both functions and looks cool on my shelf where it will do most of the lifting anyway. So I'm pretty happy with this so far. Now the first hurdle was actually creating enough space inside the Virtual Boy shell to get everything to fit in there, because I was a little surprised by this large kind of swooping hinge mechanism supposed to hold the Switch tightly in place, but it makes sense once you think about it. Obviously you don't want your Switch jiggling around in there, but I needed that precious space to fit the Orange Pi, especially the USB-C hub thing I could not disassemble. I think it was just glued together, so I was stuck with this kind of bulky apparatus to shove in there on top of the speaker and the cables and all that stuff. So the hinge had to go, which I kind of got it out cleanly, but at the end of the day I did have to break a couple little tabs because I just could not find any exposed screws that were holding it in there. And then I also lifted out these left and right little bumper things that were in there. And finally, this thing had a pretty open shell. I had a lot of room to work in here, with the downside that now I obviously didn't have the hinge. You can still set it on top and it'll stay roughly in place, so that was good enough for me to keep this thing moving. To make the headphone jack and the volume dial actually functional, we had to use our good old friend the drill to drill out the fake versions of those, so then we can swap in the volume dial that goes to our speaker and the headphone jack and put those in their place, and then use our good friend hot glue to get them fixed in there. Sorry, at this point in the video, this felt a lot like a James channel video, just a lot of hot glue. Probably a terrible Aussie impression. I'm so sorry, James. I really like your stuff. And then before final assembly, on the software side, I surfed around. I was actually gonna try the Batacera build meant for this particular Pi 02, but after the like 2-hour download it takes and then flashing it and getting it booted up, turns out that the HDMI drivers were never sorted out in that build because nothing ever displayed on the screen, which really freaked me out. I thought that maybe my Pi was broken or my cable or my screen or something, but nope, just that OS didn't have HDMI support. So after a bit of surfing, I landed on Diet Pi, which is a super minimal Debian-based distro that had support baked in for this particular chip, which was great, including the precious HDMI drivers. And I didn't even install a desktop front end. I just kept this thing purely terminal-based, installed the bare bones that I needed to be able to access it over Wi-Fi or Ethernet so that I can SMB share over some ROMs and stuff to it. Then I installed good old RetroArch, and I didn't actually do this, but you could totally just set up a little boot up script that would then boot RetroArch as soon as the Pi is turned on, or even boot into a Virtual Boy game as soon as the Pi is turned on. But once we had RetroArch running on the Orange Pi 0, all we had to do was figure out how to split the display between the two eyes so that we can actually get that virtual effect that, you know, the Virtual Boy was known for. And thankfully, I think it was the Beetle RetroArch core that's used for Virtual Boy, but it has that eye splitting functionality built in. So if you go into the core settings and you just go into the stereoscopic 3D settings, and then you just switch it to side by side, and that just split the screen perfectly. And then thankfully, the 5-inch screen, my math was correct, exactly matches the dimensions of what Nintendo does on a Switch or Switch 2. They just display the Virtual Boy output in about a 5-inch diameter. And so with the Virtual Boy being split screen, full screen on the 5-inch screen, it actually perfectly aligned. And when I slid the screen back in there and had my head in there, because, you know, you gotta stick your head in the Virtual Boy, the 3D effect actually came through perfectly, and all of a sudden I was the owner of a very almost finished Virtual Boy, which I was really pumped for. But now I might be asking, hey Coulter, how did you get your screen to slide in there so nicely and match the dimensions of what this thing is kind of expecting the Switch to be? That, my friend, is what we call trial and error 3D modeling in Fusion 360. I went through, I think, 3 iterations to finally find a design that was both skinny enough to slide in and had the right punch outs for the screen to sit flush in there and had the right hole dimensions so that I could do my heat set inserts to screw the screen onto this little bracket. Yeah, once that was in place, then the screen could just slide down in as if it were a switch 1 or 2, and then it stayed pretty firmly in place once I had to start compressing all the cables and adapters into the vacated area around the screen, which takes it to final assembly. And I'll be honest, this thing mostly came together. But what I really needed to bring this all together and for it to properly close with all the guts in there is, as far as I can tell, pretty much to take a hammer to my little USB-C hub to get that shell off of there and just get it down to exposed PCB and ports, and also probably disassemble some of the cables, like the power cable for the screen that fed off of that hub as well. It was a pretty chonky cable, but I also wanted to keep that cable insulated, but also didn't like that it was chonky. So yeah, I'd probably strip down a lot of these cables, maybe even buy specifically sized cables for it, or just run my own 4 wires for every little USB. But unfortunately, time was pressed against us, and so ended up being very content with it being 95% closed and all that being in there. But at the end of that very windy journey, I ended up with a completely enclosed, functioning Virtual Boy. Like, Pinocchio's not a toy anymore. He's a real Virtual Boy, and it was actually just really cool to stick your head in there and have the virtual effect. Like, I know you can get that by putting an actual switch in there, but it hits different when you know that all the hardware is actually contained in the headset, like the original Virtual Boy was. And there's that element of, I built this myself, so this is even that much cooler. And if you're watching this channel, you probably know that feeling, and that's why we do these unnecessary projects. As far as other emulation, I'm almost certain there's a way, especially if you're willing to write your own sort of global RetroArch shader that could split the screen perfectly on this specific resolution so that the whole RetroArch interface is split left and right. And then other emulators, like you can run N64 on this Orange Pi Zero, I believe, because it's got enough oomph for, N64, let alone GBA or SNES or whatever. And I did play around with that a bit, but the shaders that I was trying weren't splitting it correctly. It would like push the camera off in a weird direction or flicker one side or something. So for now, this Virtual Boy plays Virtual Boy ROMs, but that alone is a win because Nintendo only gives us 7 games. And now we can play, every game ever existed region free. So I'm thinking we still won the battle here. And the beautiful thing is, because that Orange Pi Zero 2 is so tiny and it's just a low power board, it sips power and is already powered off USB-C. Whereas with an original Virtual Boy, you'd have to do a tedious and fairly risky mod to add USB-C support to it. And so now we can do this thing with the original 1995 version could not do, and we can actually make this thing portable and go out in the world with it. And so to do that, we're gonna rock our EcoFlow Delta 3 Classic here, which will do the heavy lifting out there. And this guy's rocking 1800 watt output and 1024 watt hour capacity, which is fantastic because I'm pretty sure if my math is correct, that'd be enough to power this guy for, I don't know, like 2 months? Okay, I didn't actually do the math, but it's a long freaking time because this thing barely draws power and this battery is massive. Definitely gonna fare a little better than the original 6 AA batteries we had going before. The Delta 3 Classic also has 3 AC outlets, USB-A, USB-C, up to 100 watts to charge your laptop and stuff, so I can cleanly run my camera off of one outlet, the Virtual Boy off one of the USB-Cs, my lights off of another USB-A, and have a lot of wattage left over. I could probably charge my laptop and do whatever I wanted to. And the recharge might even be the best part because it can get to 0 to 80% in about 56 minutes off a wall outlet, which would be super helpful for my eventual car camping where I might need to just siphon some power from a McDonald's on my way out to the bush. And what I especially appreciate is that it's nearly silent. Like, there's no fan whine, no buzz, nothing. So when I'm trying to record dialogue 10 feet away on a picnic table or whatever, that makes a real difference. Now, as for fixing the original flaw that would make this new Virtual Boy build properly portable is the head strap. And I did think of that. And I did even order a head strap for an Oculus Quest 2, I think, off of Amazon. But unfortunately, the dimensions of that head strap and also just the egresses I have available with the Virtual Boy, I just couldn't think of a clean way to affix it without like cutting holes in the sides here in the back and everything. And that just felt a little too destructive. I wanted this mod to be internalized. And so although it didn't quite fix the portable problem as much as I would have liked, this guy is no longer reliant on a completely different system to stick in there, and we're just kind of play pretending it's a Virtual Boy. Now I've got actual hardware in there and juice for days, and so I think we've definitely moved the needle forward on both making Nintendo's toy they released this year make a lot more sense and pumping up this guy's original battery life of 4 hours in the 90s to, I don't know, a couple of months in 2026, and that's a delightful amount of overkill we like to do on this channel. One quick thing before we wrap, the Delta 3 Classic isn't just for janky build projects like this one. The reason I keep multiple EcoFlows around the house is honestly more practical than that. Like when the power goes out, for backup power, EcoFlow is honestly my first choice. And during Prime Day, EcoFlow is offering its best pricing of the year, making now a great time to invest in a reliable power solution for both your home backup and your outdoor setup. So check out the link in the description and use my code for an extra 5% off. And thank you again to EcoFlow for sponsoring this video. If you actually want to build my Virtual Boy recreation here, then the full parts list is going to be in the description below, as well as the links to Diet Pie and all that good stuff. But let me know in the comments if there are other fake Nintendo products you want me to make real or something like this. This was a lot of fun, but also a weird journey, so I need to hear from you to know if you actually enjoyed watching this. And if you don't want to type something, you just drop a little controller emoji in the comments or something so I can know to keep building weird video game stuff like this. And if you enjoyed this one, you'll probably also enjoy the video where I took a 2013 Ouya, Andrew's failing console, and turned it into a portable-ish console that I straight up took to Starbucks, which was also a bit of a weird journey. So check that one out. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.